Good afternoon, whiskey fans. It's 5 o'clock East Coast time in the U.S., and you know what that means. It's time for our Friday happy hour webcast from WhiskyCast. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio here in Haddonfield, New Jersey, where one of these days we might actually be able to get outside again and do one of these webcasts from outside. But once again, today it's raining. It just started raining in the last half hour or so. And while that's really good for the plants and the backyard and the garden and the grass and everything, it's really lousy to do a webcast in. The only advantage, though, and I guess I really can't call it an advantage here in New Jersey, is because we don't have a whole lot of distilleries to turn that rain and water into whiskey. But we do have a panel of whiskey writers from around the world joining us today for the Happy Hour webcast. Liza Weisstuch will join us from New York in a minute, but in the meantime, we have a full international panel. Joining us now from the UK on the upper right, Dominic Roskrow. Hi, Dominic. How are you doing today?
Hi, good to see you, Mark.
And in the lower left, Tash McGill joining us now. Are you in? You're in Christchurch, right?
Auckland,
New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And Emma Briones joining us in the lower right corner from her home in Spain. And once again, Liza will join us from New York in a moment. So I guess the first question, while we're waiting for comments to come in the comment window, what are you all drinking? Because it is happy hour. Emma, let's start with you. What's in your glass?
Well, I'm starting with some Cask-Strength whiskey. This is called Mentidero.
Okay.
It's produced in Madrid, and it's a really nice dram. They have like two whiskeys right now. This is a single cask, finishing in Rioja wine barrels. Quite nice. It's dry. It's really good.
And we are getting a lot of echo here, so let me make a few minor tweaks and adjustments and see what we can do to fix that problem. Go ahead, tell us some more about that whiskey, because that's not one I'm familiar with, Emma.
Well, the thing is, everyone thinks that Spain, I'm having a lot of sorry. Everyone thinks that Spain is not a whiskey country. We drink a lot of whiskey. And usually people will know BYC, which is like the big brand owned by the distillery. But we have a lot of small distilleries that are now creating their own whiskeys. There's this one Mentidero, and there's also another one called Sackman, also from Madrid. And then there's also Agot, which is from the Basque Country, really good too. They use a lot of Spanish barrels of Rioja wine, and you can see that the whiskey. I don't know if you hear the color, but this is natural color, and this is a great statement. But it's like 3-4 years old, and it's quite nice for its age, and it's really cheap because it's like 40 euros, which I think is like maybe $45 in the US. It's not bad.
Cool. Tosh, what's in your glass?
This morning, the Thompson French Oak and Smoke, which was a limited edition distiller's release just about a year and a half ago. So this is 100% New Zealand grown barley, smoked with Manuka wood, and then aged in New Zealand non-wine barrels.
Just a quick note to our guests. If any of you happen to have a browser window or something open that may be showing the YouTube feed or whatever, that may be where some of the echo is coming from. So for our panelists, if you have a browser window open, other than what we're using for this feed, could you please close it out? That may solve some of the echo problems. And Dominic, tell us what's in your glass.
Okay. So it's quite late here. So I've been drinking some Norfolk cider over the evening because I couldn't drink this morning. But I have got, this is the very end of what was left fired oak. It's 10 years old, and it's very chilled whiskey in bourbon cask, but also using some virgin oak. And it's incredibly smooth and spicy, very easy to drink, and great through this session. Lots of sessions and lockdown.
Okay, and while we're trying to solve the echo problems here, I'm going to go ahead and open up a fresh bottle. I actually brought this back from Dramfest in Christchurch about a little over, it's almost 2 months now. It seems like just yesterday, but this was an Adelphi bottling of a Teonninic 12-year-old that is probably one of the darkest whiskeys I've ever seen in a long time. But I saw this one on the shelf at Whiskey Galore and tried it sight unseen. So this is actually my first taste of it. And let's see here. Oh yeah, definitely sherry cask. A lot of figs, dates. I'm going to do full tasting notes for this one later on. But Sláinte, guys, thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
And just a reminder to our viewers at home, feel free to ask your questions, share your comments in the chat windows. Unless you're on Twitter, if you're watching on Periscope, we'll be able to see your comments. But if you are on Twitter, we will not be able to see anything that you either like or retweet back to us, just because of the way the platforms work. But let's start off with, first of all, Emma, tell us what's happening in Spain right now, because we're getting better news out of there about the pandemic, and you guys starting to come out of at least some of the lockdown that you've been in for the last month or so. Give us a sense of what's going on down there.
Well, we're starting tomorrow. We're starting tomorrow to go out a little bit more. The de-escalation, it's starting tomorrow, because it's been insane. There are like 300 people dying each day right now. But people are slowly going back to work and getting to know a little more how to live, being taken care of with masks and with gloves, and being a less let's say we love to hug people and stay with friends out, and this is going to change, but we'll see how this goes out.
Tash, tell us what's, let's bring Tash back in here, because, whoops, she just left the stream for a second. So we'll let Tash reconnect. Dominic, tell us what you're dealing with right now as you wear your Leicester jersey and wait for the Premier League to come back into play.
Yeah, I think that we're like everyone else. Everyone's had enough now, but this stuff, we're behind the curve when it comes to many of the European countries. So everything's shut down with social distancing and all of that stuff. And it's hard, but I think that because I do a lot of work online anyway, and I write about world whiskey, things haven't changed. And also, it has helped make us connect with people. I try to speak to a different whiskey person every day, just 15 minutes, 20 minutes. People like it, but it's great.
Tash, let's bring you back into this now. Tell us what you're dealing with down in New Zealand.
So we're just about halfway through the first week of level 3, which means it's essentially the same as level 4 lockdown, but we can get takeaways. Thankfully, the couriers have been able to continue to deliver delicious drams, so that's been helpful. But yeah, other than that, there's a delightful autumn chill starting to enter into the air, and the leaves turning, so it's perfect whiskey drinking season.
And at least you've got plenty of good whiskeys to enjoy down there. One of the questions that came up earlier today, and we'll throw this one out to Dominic, because you've written the most books on whiskey of pretty much most of the major whiskey writers. And Law School Drunk asked this question very early today, before we even got started here. And I want to bring that question up because it was at what point do you decide to update a book that you wrote? For example, in the World's Best Whiskeys 2nd edition, only 200 out of the 750 whiskeys were updated, and 20 of the 38 features. Obviously, you can't do all 750 when you're tasting and updating for a second or a third edition. So how's that decision made? Explain to folks how this works. When, once you have a first edition of your book out, how you update it.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. I'm hearing a lot of echo, so can I take my headphones off?
I'm sorry, what, Dominic?
Can I take my headphones off?
Yes, go ahead. Take your headphones off if it would help.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, much better. Let's give that a try.
I'm going to go back to headphones.
Actually, it was better without them, but that's okay.
Sorry about that. It's quite difficult. It's a very good question. Firstly, what happens with books is that normally you don't choose to write them. You get approached to write them. And a publisher comes to you, gives you an offer for writing it. Most nowadays, that is a set fee. So you don't get royalties as in the old days. And when it comes to the book being out of date, but it's sold well, and they want to do another one, what they're not prepared to do is pay you to do a brand new book or to do more pages. So anything in the new book has to replace what was already in the book, and they dictate to you the percentage of the material you update. So in this case, 200 reviews out of 750, and I insisted on updating the features because the features were interviews with different people in the industry, and I think that's what made the book fresh. So that was imposed on me, and I paid accordingly. I'd love to have done that book completely new. But then if you think about publishing in general, most books are reprinted and maybe an extra chapter added. I mean, Nicky Sixx from Motley Crue just updated a book 10 years old, and he added one more chapter for the story that's happened in those 10 years. Whiskey goes out of date, or it's unavailable, or it needs changing. So a second edition of any book, or a third edition, whatever, needs, you have to make decisions. But it raises a really interesting question, which we can talk about at perhaps another time, and that's about the reviews of standard whiskies that were written by a writer 10, 15 years ago, and you leave in because they're not the same whiskies.
At some point here, we have to discuss this, and I wanted to sort of wait till Liza gets back on, because we have seen this just explosion of whiskey media in the last 5 to 7 years. And I'm not sure at what point we become oversaturated. We become oversaturated, say, with whiskey festivals, with all sorts of things in life. As with a lot of things, we're not satisfied until we've got too much of it. And then we're oversatisfied. At what point do we start having too much content out there for us to absorb? I know if I wanted to, I could spend 12 hours a day down here on not only these webcasts and producing WhiskyCast, but watching the stuff everybody else is producing out there.
Are you asking me, or would the others like to comment?
The entire panel. Let's bring everybody in here.
Yeah.
Tash, what do you think?
Well, this is fascinatingly a conversation I've been having just this week with the New Zealand Food Writers Guild. We had a range of publications that were just closed and left dozens of writers, without sort of contracts. And it begs that question of, if I was to say in the New Zealand Australasian market, I would say we are oversaturated with international content and underserved with local content about what's happening here in our particular part of the world. But I think that's partly because everything that we are seeing is a little bit another version of the same thing. And I think, that point of saturation is solved when you have something, perhaps something fresh or something that's a little bit new. I think the real challenge, and this may be controversial, but the real challenge with the easy access of publication and the easy access of syndication is that it does not necessarily serve the consumer with understanding qualification and experience and the validity or the veracity of the content that they're consuming, if that makes sense. It's really easy for anybody to talk about, and all of those opinions are completely valid, but for somebody like myself who's been working on this space of education and tasting and crafting how to educate and excite people about whiskey, that's a completely different product to somebody who started drinking whiskey a year or so ago and is ready to tell all of their fans and friends about it.
Good points. Emma, when you do this, you're reaching a different audience because you're doing the work at totowhiskey.es in Spanish. And I'm not sure we're seeing the same overload in the Spanish language whiskey market among consumers as we are in English. Is that fair to say? Emma, whoops, Emma, you're still muted. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. It was for the echo, So yes, it's fair to say because, in fact, I started the blog because there was no one talking about whiskey in Spanish, and it was very difficult to find this information. Nowadays, things have changed. There are more people talking about whiskey in Spanish, not like blogs or podcasts, but there are some YouTubers, people on Instagram, maybe on Twitter, and there's a little bit more of people doing this, but there is not that saturation that there is in the English market. Anyway, I think it's important to have all this information, all these possibilities, because maybe there's people that want to listen to a podcast and hear your opinion, but maybe someone would rather have something to read on or watch something on YouTube. So every person has his own target. So everyone can enjoy whiskey from different points of view.
Emma, I want to also ask you a question that we had earlier today that came in via email from Jigs in the Philippines, who is a sherry cask lover. And of course, all of the good sherry comes from the Sherry Triangle in southwestern Spain, and all those great sherry casks that help make the whiskeys we love. What's been happening down there in southwestern Spain as the pandemic goes on? Do we have any idea yet whether a lot of the bodegas are going to be able to make it after this pandemic ends, and what's of the cooperages down there too?
Well, this is going to be hard for everyone, but in Jerez, especially for the bodegas, as you said. The thing is, in Spain, we take a lot of time staying on bars and restaurants, and you may think that we drink a lot of sherry, but in reality we don't. It's mostly drunk in the south of Spain and in those bodegas and in the restaurants and in the bars. So most bodegas are not selling those sherry, those Jerez, because there's no one that can drink it. And also we just started like the festival season. Like there's a lot of whiskey festivals that won't have place this year, and the same is going to happen with not sherry festivals, but the Feria de Abril and some festivals like this in the south of Spain that take place where people drink a lot of Jerez, Manzanilla, and this is not going to happen this year. Hasn't been cancelled for the moment. It's been postponed until September or October, but we'll see if in September or October they will be able to hold it. So the small bodegas that were selling their products to these festivals and the bars are not selling that much because we don't drink that much sherry at home. And most of them are telling them that if we don't start back on our feet on September, they might lose like 30-40% of their sales. So those that are familiar bodegas, that are really small companies, they won't be able to do it. The big ones like González Vías, Lustau, they will be able to make it, and they're already working. Some of them, González Vías, I know they're doing hand sanitizer right now. So they can make it and they will be there for the next time, but the small ones won't really make it. So that may seem like we may lose a little bit of sherry, and I think that's a problem for all the people that love sherry whiskeys like I do.
I don't think anybody's going to argue with that one. Now, Liza's joined us now that she had to finish writers. We all know how that works. So somebody wants to change the schedule on you, and you got to do the work before you can have the fun like we're having right now. So welcome, Liza. What's in your glass tonight?
I have a little bit of Longmorn 16, which is reflecting not so well. But very delicious, little sunshiny kind of. We've had I'm in New York, and it's the first day that we're seeing the sun in about 3 days, as you can see from the reflection. And so this is a little lighter, sunshiny whiskey.
Mark, can I ask Lisa a question?
Sure.
Liza, sorry, my mistake. Sorry. Here, when we look at New York, we always think we used to do Whiskey Live New York now, because this is where everybody comes out their apartments. They come into Central Park, to do an event in the Tavern on the Green in Central Park with something else. But everybody wants to get out after a long winter, and you were just saying it's the first day today. Is this a real threat with the lockdown now? Because New York would want to get out now. And also, then you have to go back again at the end of the summer. So how's it going to work?
That's so funny. Every Friday morning on this one particular talk show on the radio, the mayor is on, and he actually used the word, dangerous. This weekend is going to be dangerous because it's going to be 70 degrees.
Yeah.
Sorry, we use Fahrenheit. I don't know how that translates.
That's okay. We're up there.
But
about
21 degrees. 21.
Yeah.
But he's worried that everyone's going to crowd the parks. And we've had a few instances, like when the Blue Angels flew over 2 days ago, people were not abiding by social distancing because everyone wanted to be outside and watch the Blue Angels. So yeah, it's a little worrisome. That's
quick.
on point.
One quick question to add to that, because I don't want to do it on this show. Can I talk to you about why that guy's not stood for president? Because you're New York, he should be standing. He should be running.
Oh, the governor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are talking.
That's my view. I'll talk to you about that another time.
Okay.
If you're not familiar with Governor Andrew Cuomo, he is on TV virtually every day, showing a lot of leadership for the entire state of New York. And he actually said he's not running for president.
Same.
Yeah. I won't start talking because I don't want to distract from come in late, sabotage the conversation.
I'll come back to you another time.
We'll do that.
Yeah.
Did I say it wrong again? Did I just say it wrong again?
Later. Because otherwise then things get into politics and then I get
another time.
Well, listen, I'm free. I don't have anywhere to be, so I'm around.
Cool.
Tasha, tell us what's going on with New Zealand whiskey right now, because when I was down there, we're starting to see more and more distilleries cropping up. Before the pandemic, I know they were getting ready to start the distillery that Greg and the boys at the New Zealand Whiskey Company were working on down in Dunedin. What's going on down there as far as new distilleries and what's coming online?
It's so hard to describe the sense of energy, I think, that's in the industry, or at least has been in the industry over the last 3 to 4 years. Obviously, we've had a number of distilleries online for some time. Thompson has obviously been there. The Pocono Whiskey Distillery started laying down new spirit last year. And we have several smaller craft distilleries. The New Zealand Whiskey Company project has been a long project of crowdfunding and sourcing to be able to get to the point of being able to move their stills, which I think arrived in country last year, to move their stills into the Spates Brewery House. So there's a little bit of a partnership happening there. But if I was to summarize it really quickly, there's an enormous amount of activity, really exponential growth in the last 5 years. There's a lot of momentum and excitement in the industry. We're starting to have those fledgling conversations around what do industry regulations look like for us, or what would it look like to define New Zealand spirit. And those conversations, as you know, are always fascinating and take some time. And of course, there's the beautiful Cadrona distillery which I think has really led the way in terms of taking a traditional approach to, say, Scotch whisky and embedding that into the New Zealand landscape. And it truly is, in a beautiful valley. So it's incredibly exciting. Everything from farm style, field to bottle is happening with Old Distillery. But it's very new and it's very exciting, and it's very. I'm incredibly proud to be part of it, because I think there's a real collegial nature to what's happening in the distilling industry here.
We also have a question for you from Ashley Penny in Ireland. With Whisky Live growing so popular here in Ireland, it's grown to a 2-day event. Will we see any distilleries from New Zealand come over to exhibit? And I think I know the answer is because none of them have really enough to export yet, except for maybe New Zealand Whiskey Company. So,
yeah, well, so the answer is yes, you will, because you're using future tense. Yes, you will. I know that Cardrona Distillery have been making some big investment in their UK sales footprint, but they're really the only one at the moment with a sort of substantial and reliable go-to-market plan. That being said, we're still 5 to 6 years away from seeing any real volume able to be getting to that market. So you may see them start to bring a few of their smaller releases just to get some excitement going on. But I would be expecting that it will be within 6 to 10 years that you'll really start to see anything of volume and excitement happening. The important thing, I think, when it comes to, say, the New Zealand Whiskey Company, what's fascinating about that story, and I don't expect a lot of people know it, but that they are essentially becoming a new distillery because they have previously been selling old stock from the Willowbank distillery, which was mothballed many years ago. So there's, of course, going to be a little bit of a change in what happens there as they move into they've been making spirit, but as they move into the new distillery, there's going to be a lot of freshness to that. So maybe we'll see you there in 6 to 10 years.
I think they're probably about, as you said, like 6 to 10 years away, but maybe 6 to 10 years behind the folks in Tasmania and the rest of Australia in terms of getting their capacity up and running, because I've been waiting for the Australians to get to the point where they can make enough to get export markets stocked sufficiently, and they're just now starting to do that with some of their distilleries. And I think that's the case we're going to see with them also.
Can I ask you
I think one of the... Oh, yeah. Sure. Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the differences between Tasmania and Australia and New Zealand is that Australia has a population volume that can sustain a really vibrant internal whiskey industry, whereas New Zealand is going to have to rely on some export. And so that will maybe change that path to market. But sorry, Liza, go ahead.
No. We are all sitting elsewhere around the world, absolutely just in awe of what's happened in your country as far as eliminating the coronavirus and getting things reopened. Were the distilleries there? Do you know if they were producing the whole time, or was there any sort of grand celebration? I'm sure it was part of a bigger initiative. I imagine people were out dancing in the streets when they were allowed to, but
well, we're still not allowed to. That's the key thing. So we've made significant progress towards eliminating, and when we use that word elimination, we just mean no community transmission. Wow. Everything's under control. So we had 3 new cases yesterday, and we've had 19 deaths in total. So I think we're all feeling really confident. But part of maintaining that is that we are still in effectively lockdown. We're all still, we have a little bit more flexibility in terms of where we can move, but basically the rule is still stay at home. That being said, so distilleries were classed as non-essential businesses. So for a lot of them, it's meant down tools. Many have switched to ethanol production for hand sanitizer.
Oh.
I have to ask, does your prime minister drink whiskey?
I have known her to have a dram or 2. Yes.
Good. Now I like her even more.
Once, yes. I believe that she's a bit of a fan. We've never sat down to have a drink together, but I have imbibed in her presence. So that's my claim to fame.
And you're not saying that Aussies drink a lot, do you? When they've got enough to support take care of all that capacity?
Well, we know that they drink a lot, but it's a lot of 4X and Fosters, isn't it? No, I'm just kidding. Australians have a great palate, but I would say, to your previous comment, if we're 6 to 10 years behind, I think, we'll also be 6 to 10 times better quality. So that'll be great.
You're not biased.
Okay.
You can't mess with the Anzac Brotherhood.
You pulled out a Spanish whiskey that I had not seen before. The only single malt from Spain that I knew about was DYC.
Yeah,
And
the one.
obviously that there are some coming up that we don't hear much about outside of Spain. Tell us what's going on, because Beam Suntory owns the DYC brand and the distillery, but that other one is a bit unusual, and we're not seeing those.
No, this is from a really small distillery in a city outside Madrid. They produce gin and rum, and this is the first year that they got some whiskey. They got 2, the single cask, and then there's a blended malt. And they started like 3-4 years ago with whiskey, so it's really young. But the thing is, I thought when the first time I saw these bottles, I thought this won't be anything interesting. See, I like Dick. I really like Dick. And I think people in Spain don't like Spanish whiskey because they don't trust that this will be good. And I did the same with Mentidero. I was like, okay, we'll see. But then I tasted it and it was like, okay, we can do stuff. And then we had the other one I was telling you, like Sackman. This is the batch 4 already. And they've done a 12-year-old. This is an 8-year-old. And they're trying different stuff also. So the thing is, these small distillers are trying to get ahead and to be known, but we are so used to drink Scotch that Spanish whiskey is like, wait, what are we doing with this? But we're doing really nice stuff. There's also Agot, which is a Basque whiskey that just won an award, the World Whiskey Award. And everything they do, the small distilleries is done with love and care, and they try, they're learning.
Emma, we are go for some reason. What happened?
Yes. True.
Not sure what happened.
What's happening?
Echoing the love. Okay.
What's happening?
Live television. It's exciting. Live the dream. Oh, great. Now.
Oh,
We lost.
Oh no.
Back in. Coming back in. There we go.
Hello.
oh, hello.
Welcome back.
I know I didn't thing over this end.
This is weird.
Well, let's.
What's happening?
What happens when I do this? Aha! It is not when I do this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is my microphone down. Hopefully we can figure it all out. Let's just say we'll be having a chat with tech support on this webcast. Hey kids.
Are we still live?
We're still live. Yeah.
It's not as calamitous as the Stephen Sondheim concert the other day.
It's not either. Okay, and as
I'm just
Now
listening
you've gone
to
really
like
weird.
three times. Every sentence is like 3 times.
this is. Okay. Move on.
Okay.
Dominic, tell us what you've been working on lately, and everybody else.
No, before I do, Mark, can I go back to what Tash was saying?
Sure, go ahead.
Tash was talking about New Zealand whiskey and about 6 to 10 years. I'm really sorry to disappoint you, but I don't think that's going to happen. I'll tell you what's happening in New Zealand. Sorry, in Australia, is that when I first started writing about world whiskey 17 years ago, I thought I would make my living writing about all these new distilleries like Lark and Sullivan's Cove, etc. What actually happened was they started producing so much. They started getting so much press worldwide that suddenly the whole of Southeast Asia opened up to them, and they then got popular in their own domestic market. And I remember going to Sydney and somebody's pointing up and saying, "Look at the globe. The UK is a tiny little country on the other side of the world, and England is right next to Scotland, and Scotland's our biggest opponent. So why would we export there? Well, we could sell all our whiskey in Southeast Asia." And it's true with bourbon too. Australians are starting to enter the American market, but they've got so big markets on their own doorstep. And I doubt New Zealand whiskey will ever be cost effective enough to be on sale in certainly in Europe, but probably in America. The New Zealand Whiskey Company is expensive because it's rare. It's quite right what Tash was saying. And it's all come from the Willowbank Distillery, and they put it into red wine casks, and it's fabulous. But it's of limited quantity and of extreme price. So I don't think we'll ever see the New Zealand, and what you said before was absolutely right. New Zealand can't sustain a whiskey industry by itself. You also have a law in New Zealand that allows people to self-distill. And there is a huge respect for Scotland in New Zealand. You only have to look at the people in Christchurch and Fraser and what he's doing. New Zealanders are very slow to accept that Manuka honey finished cask whiskies from Thompson could be a thing, or using a New Zealand red wine barrel cask and taking Willowbank average whiskey and bring it up. So what I'm saying is, I'd love to think that's the world we're going to, but I can talk from experience. 15 to 20 years in now, those distilleries are serving their own markets, and they're probably rarely. You'll get the odd one like Starwood in Australia and Sullivan's Cove, but Lark never will. Hartwood never will. Most of those distillers will never really have a global reach.
Tell us what you really think, Dominic.
Sorry?
Tell us what you really think.
That's me. I'm just me.
I'll give you a chance to respond to Dominic on.
I'm sorry.
I'm kidding. It's okay.
But Tash, tell me what you think. Am I right? I mean, the Thompsons, I used to talk to Thompsons 12 years ago, and they were doing that Manuka honey, but they sent me the odd stuff. They don't even bother now, and they don't bother now because, frankly, they don't need the press. They'll sell everything. They'll sell everything they make in Australasia. So why do you want Dom Roskrow in England telling you you can't have it?
Oh, I think that's a really important point. I know that there is a marketing blueprint and plan for Cardrona to go international. Now, whether or not that works for them, and by international I mean the UK, Scottish market, whether or not that works for them, big question. And a lot of that is really influenced by trade policy. So I'm going to get a little bit nerdy with my economics hat and to say, COVID-19 has done a number of things to fast track what we're going to be then trade conversations. The idea of New Zealand whiskies shifting to a primarily Southeast Asian market, I think, is an incredibly valid one, especially given the negotiations that we're currently doing within Southeast Asia, within the Asia-Pacific Rim, and that's part of a broader economic policy. So I don't necessarily disagree with you. The reason why I'm specific about Cardrona, I don't expect that Thompson whiskey will necessarily ever make a big footprint in the UK. I think you're right. I reference Cardrona because I know that that's in there. Blueprint. And I think the question is going to be, volume. One of the challenges that we have in New Zealand is that, and I think I've spoken with Mark about this maybe, but one of the challenges is that everybody in New Zealand is trying to make a premium craft product, and they're trying to sell it for bucket loads of money. Now, sometimes they have to do that because it's volume. That would be the case with Thompson. That would be the case with Old Distillery. That would be the case with I think, Lemma, It's terrible when you can't remember the name of a distillery in your own country. But with a number of those distilleries, they're always going to be limited to price by volume. For distilleries like New Zealand Whisky Company, and also for Pocono whiskey, I think there's a massive opportunity to consider what does an excellent quality, everyday drinking, price accessible whiskey look like in the New Zealand market. And if they can crack that, then I think they actually have a genuine shot at the Asia Pacific market. Because if there's one thing I've learned from watching many of the gin and vodka producers here in New Zealand go big into the Asian market, is that they have to have both premium and price accessible products to make a footprint. They've got to have a range, and so volume is going to be a big decider. Would be my pushback.
Okay, let's talk American single. Liza, do you expect that America's going to find a stage?
Sorry. Do I expect? What did you say?
Will Americans find a place on the world outside of the U.S.? Will we forced to accept perhaps American single be regarded as well as Scotland, another country?
I think as a category, it's going to be a little hard to market. Even though it is its own definable thing, like by definition, we can explain it. But I don't really think that the mass market cares enough about the nitty-gritty detail. I'm sorry to say. But I mean, as individual products, absolutely. I mean, some of them are outstanding. I mean, I was in Seattle, I think, for Westland. Single malts are outstanding. I mean, they could stand up to any single malt whiskey or bourbon, as far as I'm concerned, as far as quality and technical. What's the word? Well, technical quality. I mean, they're brilliantly made. And but as far as exporting them or marketing them as a thing, like to say American rye, American bourbon, American rye, American single malt, I think it's just going to convolute what the international drinker is thinking.
Okay, fair enough.
But I think if individual brands go out and market themselves, 100%, absolutely. Because they're just really good.
Emma, I'm going to put you on the spot for a second here, and let me unmute you now, and we'll hope this all works. Emma, can you unmute your microphone so we can
No?
there we go. So we can put you on the spot for a second. In looking at totowhiskey.es, I found a great quote from you, and since we have a panel of both male and female writers on here, it's great to bring this one up. Controversial point. Quote from you on your website. Don't be fooled. We women also like whiskey. In fact, we taste it better.
Yep. Well, I had to say that we really do, but in fact, I've seen that after being pregnant, you have developed a better nose, and it's even better than you did before. And this quote is taken a bit out of context because this was because in Spain everyone is like, "Oh, you're a girl and you like whiskey! Wow!" I know this is more common in the US, or in Scotland, but here's like, "Oh, girls just drink gin and rum, and so you drink whiskey. How cool! You're special." And that's one thing that I started to find every time I went to a whiskey tasting or everything. Was like, "Oh, but you're a girl. Well, how do you drink whiskey? Oh, you do it on the rocks. So here's the whiskey for the girls." And I got very angry because it's "Oh no, that you take the peated whiskey because you like it better, or this one that is sweeter, and I like the whiskeys that some men wouldn't like because I just like whiskey and that's it."
Every time this conversation comes up, I say I'm going to start a club for men who like salad.
Be the world's smallest club.
That's a good one.
Men who like Diet Coke.
I'm just raising the comment here because Emma put it in her bio, so I'm just give her a chance to explain it and defend it and make the argument. But I like your analogy, Liza. Dominic, you want to answer on behalf of the Y chromosomes in the bunch?
Dominic, do you like salad?
Whoops, he's still muted. My mistake here. There we go, Dominic.
Okay. Yeah, well, I love that analogy. I totally 100% agree with this. I did a pink edition of Whisky magazine in about 2004. About 15 years ago, I did a pink issue where I just had female tasters for a lot of it, but also perfumiers. Mainly perfumiers are gay, but again, they've got incredible palates. And these are real kind of generalizations, I know. But women have far more descriptive powers than men. You're absolutely right about pregnancy and childness and their ability to nose because of all that. You also have an array of scents through your handbags and stuff that we just don't even start on. And I've never met all the best tasters I know are female, I think. And I totally 100% get it. I'm hoping we've moved on from that, though, because when I started writing about whiskey, we were still at the stage where women weren't allowed to peaty whiskey because that wasn't for ladies. You know, we travel the world now. We eat food. We taste lots of spices and extreme flavors. Women have a far greater array of flavor. So why should we really be part of it? And I'm still surprised we're still talking about it. But the point you make is 100% right.
Okay. Emma wins the conversation. Emma wins the internet for today.
Cheers. Well done.
Let's throw another question out there. Do we have too many whiskey books on the market right now? Half of them you've written, Dominic, at one point or another, but do we have too many whiskey books out there? I know it's a shame to ask this to a bunch of writers, but you can ask the question.
I think so. I think there's too many cocktail books out there. It's really hard to find an interesting angle for a cocktail book or a whiskey book. Well, I mean, you could open to the first chapter of so many whiskey books, and it's the same exact information. So that's just my opinion.
I go back to a similar comment to what I made earlier, which is that I think there are maybe, let's not say too many, maybe we say there's enough of the same type of whiskey book. But then the challenge is I think now is about the time to start working on, a comprehensive story of New Zealand whiskey, going all the way back to the original distilleries and now what's happening with this rebirth. But then to Dominic's point earlier, what's the pathway for that content? If we make that book now, what happens in 5 and 10 years time? So, maybe it's just that we have enough of the same type. Maybe we need a new type.
Yes. I totally agree with that because I think there are too many books with tasting notes, and I don't need a book telling me how a whiskey tastes because I want to try it. But there are still some books that are different. I read one from Rachel McCormack, which is called Chasing the Dram, where she talks about how to cook with whiskey. And she says too many interesting things that I've tried. And that's a good one. And it's quite new. I think it has like a couple of years. So it's not an old book. And there are whiskey books that are interesting and whiskey books that are just more of the same.
So Dominic, what's your next whiskey book?
Zing!
No.
We scared him off.
I'm sorry.
Book left.
Cut him off. Dominic, I cut you off.
Can I just say that I totally get with what everyone's saying here. I totally agree with it. There are 2 or 3 things I would like to say. Firstly, me personally, I have only one whiskey book left, and I've done 16. And I've always vowed that no of my two books would be the same. I don't want to ever write another chapter on how to taste whiskey, because most of it I disagree with anyway. What I normally say is, you drink whiskey any way you like, but this is what they'll tell you should do. What's the point of that? And so my last 2 or 3 books have not had any of that in it. So that's the first thing. Second thing I'd say is this, that at the end of the day, the people who produce books are in our capitalist system. They're there to make money. So if there's not a demand for them, they wouldn't supply them. And the reality is, we're living in amazing times. In the last 20 years, since I started getting into this job, what I've seen is whiskey go from, especially in America, it was a top shelf, bad product. You know, when I first went to Kentucky, I was interviewed on television because they couldn't understand why an English journalist wanted to talk about bourbon. They didn't get it. It was a bottom shelf drink, and you didn't talk about it. You talked about racing in Kentucky. You didn't talk about whiskey. And then now everything is whiskey, and that's what's changed in my lifetime. So I'm being very fortunate to have benefited from all this. But the reality is that if there wasn't the demand now for all those books, they wouldn't publish them. It's very simple. If people don't like them, don't buy them. Very simple. But I personally am fed up. I've said everything I've got to say. I've got one book I'd like to do, but I think the lockdown and the current Ebola crisis is going to massively affect it. And Mark, you and I did touch on it. Yeah. Oh, sorry, no, I read it on one of your sites. Craft distilling or micro distilling is in trouble from the coronavirus. Yeah. My last book would have been about all of the world distillers I've never written about that I'd like to write about. The problem is that books date so quickly now, and you know, you basically write a book by March and they ship it out to China to print it, and it appears in September, and by that time the internet has already moved on, and so print media is dying. And I'm very, very proud that I was lucky enough to be part of it when it was there. But I think it's now for another generation. I'm just lucky I got ahead of it. I think there's another way of communicating, and I've got guests. You've got guests here now who are going to do a far better job of taking whiskey forward than I will. And I'm realistic. You know, I've had a great life. I've had a great career. But it's not my time anymore. It's their time. It's your time.
Well, I'm going to be a little bit of a rabble rouser here. And Mark and I were speaking about this earlier. The thing that worries me about print dying and the internet taking over, which has been an issue for what now, 6, 7, 10 years, is at least a whiskey book you have to sell, and somebody has to vet it and say, okay, this is good enough for public consumption. Whereas, you know, you look at the Yelp generation, and there's stories about people in restaurants saying, if you don't give me this, I'm going to give you a bad Yelp review. You know, everybody's a critic now, and it's just, you know, who do you trust if you're not in the circle and whatever brand or whatever process or whatever, and somebody's website comes up and it's either wrong or not well done. There's no vetting. There's no quality control. So that's what concerns me.
Our friend Greg in Paris points out, I tried to publish my book of 600 pages and no publisher wanted it. So I turned to put most of my work on a website and YouTube channel. And Bill Ricker points out, 600 pages is the wrong size of book today. People don't have the patience for a 600-page book. Also, we have a comment here from Law School Drunk. I'd love to see just a book of untold distillery anecdotes from the master distillers and distillery managers. I think we have a couple of those. Gavin Smith has written a couple of those. Ton Room Tales and Still Room Stories, or something along those lines. I think is we've done a couple of those. I have noticed now when I unmute the phone, we get the echo. I'm not sure what's going on with your channel, but when I unmute you like that, the echo goes away. So I'm not sure what's going on here.
Just unmute me and I'll keep quiet.
It's a grand promise, Dominic. A grand promise.
I'll try my best.
Okay. We also have a comment, speaking of Dominic now, from Bill Ricker. My daughter will be glad to hear Dominic was wearing LCFC. Lester, Red Sox fans appreciate the worst to first to worst story arc with a big smile.
Can I comment on that?
Oh, go for it.
We are in the same ballpark. You know, we have allies and friends all over the world for the same reason. Today, the Daily Telegraph in the UK decided that the Leicester City story was the greatest story in Premiership history. But we're aware of what's happening in other places. We watched the baseball the year that you went through and did that. And here's to you, mate. Cheers.
We have a question from John Kalinowski that I put up on the screen earlier, and this one's for you, Emma. Who wrote that whiskey cookbook? That wasn't the one Martine Nouet wrote, was it?
No, it's Rachel McCormack. And the book is not only about cooking, but it mixes recipes with stories, and it's called Chasing the Dram. It's about chasing the dram in Scotland. It's a really nice book.
And Accurate Gear points out a book is something that is always touchable, and it's something you can
That's
always
real.
enjoy with a dram. Let's see here. Looking at the other questions here. Charles Epperson points out a good question. Gen X doesn't have the patience for whiskey books, and unfortunately, that will be drinking whiskey in the long run. Should we be gearing whiskey towards the next generation? Or, I mean, let's face it, Dom and I are the old farts in the room here. You guys are the next generation. What should we be gearing this next generation?
I don't know. I disagree.
Yourself, okay?
I disagree. I think it's the total hip thing to drink now, and at least in American cities. I want to toss in a little anecdote to follow up on what Dom said about years ago in Kentucky. Why do you want to go talk about bourbon rather? As do you guys know? I know you do, Mark, about the Brandy Library in New York. It was it opened in 2004, like way before a whiskey bar was anything. Totally groundbreaking. He actually called it the Brandy Library because he didn't want to call it the Whiskey Library because whiskey would have turned people off. It was too fusty. It was too, who wants to drink whiskey? Ew. In 2004. So it's still called the Brandy Library. And yeah, neat little story.
And he's back. He stepped away for a second to switch out headphones now. Maybe that's the problem. We can only hope here. Catador Itinerante said he may have missed this in the beginning, but could Emma talk about the sherry distilleries or bodegas for COVID? Are they still operating? Just a quick update since he can go back and catch this on the replay.
Yes, just that they closed for a couple of weeks because we were all in lockdown, and they're operating, but not all of them will go after this will work out because they're not selling enough. So the small ones will mostly close.
And Greg in Paris points out again, yeah, Bill Ricker, the biggest publisher wrote me a nice rejection letter saying no plans to publish a book about whiskey. 3 months later, published a box with small cards, a tumbler, and hip flask. Oh yeah, that'll happen. There is no honor among authors or publishers. Tash, unmute your microphone so we can hear you. Tash, did you unmute?
Yes,
did you unmute?
I did, yes.
The microphones here and trying to mute all this stuff. As Bill Ricker points out, I resemble the old fat remark. Of course. And Travis Adams, every whiskey drinker is required to buy 2 bottles of sherry a year. Those are the rules. After all, if we don't buy the sherry, then we don't have the sherry casks that we need for the whiskeys. Is that true, Emma?
Well, it is. In fact, I remember one time at Macallan that I was visiting the distillery, and someone from the team at Macallan told me that we should make sherry cool again in Spain. So we should drink more sherry and you will have more cask to age the whiskey.
And as Greg points out, good point, Travis and Adam Calderon Sanchez. I agree with that. Bill says yours look better. Would you like to be a review reader? Okay, yeah, well, that could happen. And then Greg, for uneducated audiences, yes, Bill. Sometimes the comments on the chat room are just even as good as what we're doing here in the main room right now. And Bob Winning, our friend from Malt Stock, points out, and sherry is a great drink. And Bob, thank you for watching. I hope that we are able to get together for Malt Stock in September. I'm afraid we probably won't, but I'm hoping that we can all get together for that one. Travis fully agrees. Charles Epperson, yes, with sherry, going to the Wyatt's Sherry now. And Dominic is raising his hand, so I'm going to mute everybody else.
Can you hear me? Can I speak? Okay. All I'd say on that is that in our household, we have a rule that on Sundays, we're trying to remember what Sunday is, but we always have a roast dinner on a Sunday, and we always have sherry beforehand. And that includes my 14-year-old daughter. It's compulsory in my family to make sure that we continue to drink sherry to support the sherry industry.
And Graham Fraser points out those bottles aren't Harvey Bristol.
No, proper Heather sherry.
Ecker's Gear points out sherry is the best wine in the world. And Greg terrifically good for shock. I had a mention about that one day. And I think pointed out absolutely buy sherry separately and have Jerez Boilermakers. Thanks, Bill. Well, I'll tell you what, gang. We're going to have to. I'm going to go ahead and pull the plug for tonight because we have had so many echoes and so many technical problems. But we had fun for an hour while we heard all of the echoes here. I want to thank our guests, Tash McGill, Liza Weisstuch, Emma Briones, and Dominic Roskrow. Guys, thank you all for joining us. And give me just a second here while I close things out. I do want to remind you that we are about 10% of our way towards the goal that we set on the last webcast. Thanks to Chris Ratcliffe. We are at about 10% of our goal towards the infamous Buzz for Bartenders campaign. As you probably noticed by now, I need a haircut badly. But if I'm going to get a COVID cut, we're going to make some money for charity out of this. So here's the deal. If you visit WhiskyCast.com, we have the details on the website for Buzz for Bartenders. You can go to the website and you'll be able to find the links to make a donation to the United States Bartenders Guild Foundation or the Drinks Trust in the UK or any other bartenders charity that you want to support in your country that is trying to help bar industry staffers who've been laid off during the coronavirus pandemic, because a lot of those jobs are regrettably not going to come back. We just heard yesterday out of New York that the legendary Pegu Club that was one of the mainstays of the entire cocktail renaissance for the last 15 years will not be coming back when that city comes off of lockdown. And the U.S. Bartenders Guild has had close to 300,000 applications for help from bar staffers right now. So they are trying to raise money. If you want to donate, we would encourage you to do so if you're able to donate. If you're not, we understand completely. But here's the deal. If we raise $1,500 by the end of our next webcast on Wednesday night, when we have Richard Patterson and Dr. Bill Lumsden as our two guests for the hour or so, then on next Friday's happy hour webcast, the boss will be taking the clippers that we normally use to take care of our sheepdog Bristow and will be giving me the infamous COVID cut. The more money we raise, the shorter the haircut, gang. $2,500 and it goes all the way off. So you know what to do. If you're able to do it, I hope you'll be able to support us. Once again, the next webcast is on Wednesday night. We will do our level best to get the echoes solved by then. It's only been a problem in the last day or so, and I'm not sure what's happened, but we will get it figured out, kids. Have a great weekend. Be safe. Stay home. Be responsible and drink in moderation. And just try to have fun, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again, everyone, in Sláinte.